Yeah, I was kind of wanting to pick up on that part I was talking about, Point Break with Patrick Swayze, and it's Keanu Reeves. I think it's how it's pronounced. And yeah, so I was thinking about that because of the information in it, and ultimately, following, not really following, but knowing that it led to the movie Matrix. And I'm trying to actually think of the actor's name, but he's referring to Demetrius, and it's almost like in linguistic alphanumerics, and it's kind of like one of the bigger things. Why one pronoun, the four types of pronouns kind of be used as a subject, and the guy in the movie Matrix, it ultimately gets to like supplemental security income and practical application, and it seems to has a combine of like almost like blood sport involving phlebotomy, amyloidosis in a way, but it seemed to be the thing about Matrix involving a supplemental security income, almost like the electronic benefits transfer that seemed to be involving like Kuwait. And somehow, the thing about the electronic benefits transfer involving, benefits between Social Security Administration and Health and Human Services. And that movie Point Break, okay, it's like Patrick Swayze is like referring to catching away the whole entire time point of the movie, okay? And it gets to the point that knowing that grandfathered corporate law of retroactive presidential administration is kind of like the way it's being placed, not necessarily following actors and actresses, but knowing that the movies that they're in, there seem to be like a chronological, that kind of like with Kiefer Sutherland and the movie Young Guns, about being out in the desert plains and the peyote thing. Ultimately, him in the White House in television series 24, and it presents all that information about student loan combined with a Pell Grant, and almost like Al-Anon in a way, a foster grant, an adoptionist like relation, an architecture platform embedded in encryption as a Pell Grant, a presidential, executive, legislative. But knowing the history of like grandfathered corporate law of retroactive presidential administration, and realizing the different movies, it seemed to be that a lot of movies kind of in practical applications seem to be involving certain factors involving even the idea of like the Safari browser. It presents the similarities of functionality of what seemed to be being presented in like blocking storage and functionality in like internal storage, or like anywhere where memory would be the issue in needing the functionality not being congested, but like in anatomy with like amyloidosis is the exposure to the bone and causes the bone marrow to actually in turn trigger the immunoglobulin and produce overabundant amount of white blood cells, okay? But it seemed to be like all that information, it's almost like the Matrix involving from like Point Break, okay, with like, I think it's pronounced Keanu Reeves. In any case, okay, he's in that movie Matrix, okay, and it seemed to be ultimately, the guy that's in there, he's like referring to Demetrius. It's almost like, when a high rise is completed, I'm not sure if it's like every high rise, or really what the real issue is of the Marmalade Sky, but it seemed to be the COVID ID 19 of the Marmalade Sky of like 1972, in that one particular weekend. And I'm not sure if the Marmalade Sky was like the orange on Saturday, because like I was asleep, okay, on that one particular weekend for like 2.5 days, okay, like I'd mentioned previously, but woke up at sunset and became, this is the year 2026 now, okay. I'm at the age of 61, okay, and it seemed to be now, the thing about, all that, reference to like, hey, what's your 20? And from like the Marmalade Sky, okay. That one particular weekend, I'm not sure if like Saturday was likewise an orange all day, and the next day Sunday. I know all I really know is that I was asleep for like 2.5 days, okay, and woke up on Sunday at approximately at sunset, okay. But like 20 years later, at Sunset Boulevard in Friendswood, Texas, a baptism, okay. Ultimately, the thing about the Psychic Warrior, America's foremost psychic spy, and the cover up the top secret CIA Stargate program, because like on that book cover, the author's last name's like Morehouse, okay, but the guy's underwater, like a baptism, okay, and it seemed to be the thing about Flag Day on a Saturday, June 14th, 1992, 20 years later from the Marmalade Sky, and it seemed that I'd refer to like that one particular weekend seemed to be, the idea like on the backside of the US $1 bill, identifying the difference between calculus and quantum, because calculus has a different design E, but it's not used in structure that quantum has as formula for computation. As the structure, calculus uses the different design E, but it doesn't have the structure in that way that's normally identifying, quantum a lot more so than involving chemistry. But if I'm not mistaken, that digital signal processing speed involving chemistry, I'm not sure if it's like limited to like the idea of maybe catalyst or processing speed as reaction. Although, the thing about attenuation is really that, like in electronics and like robotic automation, okay, and audio production, it's like sequencing characterization in sets of 6, and it's digital signal processing speed of special effects, okay. There seemed to be that one word being 140 in Pearland, Texas that way, and it seemed to be the Robocop thing about the Transco Tower turning into the Williams Tower, and ultimately even Allied Bank at like Milam turning into Wells Fargo and then the Williams Tower, and it seemed to be the twin peaks of television programming. Ultimately even, Infinity and the commercial of that one particular actress in Twin Peaks in Alaska. Ultimately, she was a, spokesperson for like a commercial like Infinity. Yes, she had her own television series of V television series likewise in addition, but it's kind of like it originates as a word. It seemed to be originally copacetic, seemed to be the thing really ultimately of like the Alaskan pipeline being Keystone, and copacetic might be the only idea in my mind of like, knowing that Keystone is the midnight blue of, the De Beers diamonds in my mind of like the book Secrets of Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, okay, and all that information in there, linking, the map in the way that it does. But it seemed to be the idea that the midnight blue of Keystone, which is like Keystone Light and Coors Light, they really taste exactly the same, okay, it's just that one name is one, and it's identified as a midnight blue. And it seemed to be a thing about the prefix of the White House of 1995 being identified as a midnight blue. The first number of the prefix of the White House, number 4. Yeah, that's like the first number of the prefix of the White House, but yet 5 and 6, okay, which is like 56 in the second and third of the prefix of the White House. And it seemed to be, all that like that long ago, like in 1972, like now in 2026. Of summit meetings involving Geneva, Switzerland of like 1995, and seemingly a whole lot going on. And the memory minus the facto being, think about NASA and National Aeronautics Space Administration, the stratosphere involving the Marmalade Sky. And it seemed to be the thing about COVID-19, wasn't even heard of in 1972, but it seemed to be that as a method of banking is like grandfathered corporate law of retroactive presidential administration, identifying importing and exporting as a presidential level. Yet it presents, the vice president network is like immigration, customs enforcement, and the idea of like carbon footprints, absentee voting, mechanics lien of like trading energy is like some idea of a driveway being like an intellectual easement of access, okay, and what's really been going on, okay, about that, and how the euro dollar seemed to be, just an alphanumeric equation of a new compromise of one word in transfiguration about re-entering heaven. The book of Thessalonians, okay, the alphanumeric's 192. And a new accomplished with that symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS being like 58, and the combine of a Inuit being 79, and C3 and the symbolic representation being 58, and the PTIS being 64. It's like 204 minus transfiguration is 12, okay, like region 1 and 2, okay, but 12, likewise, it's like automatically the football quarterback thing about, in my mind, that specific equation in that way. But it seemed to be, the difference between 58 getting to 59 and Highway 59 being 140 in Pearland. It's kind of like the whole new idea of like, like Fortune 500 in the future being written, and all these things are going on of grandfather corporate law of retroactive presidential administration being in my mind that Centerpoint Energy had been, the idea, like maybe the idea of a carbon footprint, absentee voting, and a mechanics lien of trading energy as a euro dollar, like in Texas, okay, like right here in Pearland, okay. It's not that like anyone's ever told me like, well, not one thing about it, but hey, I bought a compact disc and been to some concerts here in the Houston area, okay. Seemingly, certain information about going through the Stargate program, taken to a lot of locations that really at the time, there was really some intense stuff. But in any case, so like memory had become the issue, and like a 25-30 year period had passed, and not even realizing memory had really seriously been the issue of like the Stargate program. And it really wasn't even until then that's when I really actually identified like, you know, it as a Stargate program going beyond the thought of like, you know, the normal idea of a circuit, okay, involving entertainment and, you know, we international State of the Union address and other factors. But it seemed to be like what I'm really getting at, like once again, okay, is that the guy in the movie Matrix with like Keanu, I think that's Keanu Reeves. In any case, okay, he's in that Matrix, okay, but it seemed to be the combine of what really has been really an experience of mine. It seemed to be involving like the what is normally identified like in oncology as exposure, you know, combating the idea of cancer, and like with chemotherapy and radiation and exposure that ultimately affects, you know, the bone marrow that in turn triggers the immunoglobulin, and it seemed to be all that information putting a restriction in blood flow. And, you know, it's kind of like the Safari browser, it was presenting that as like a practical application and the functionality, and it's like the amyloidosis in anatomy, it's like it fills up every possible, you know, storage to where functionality is no longer, you know, really a reality, and it kind of like slowly and progressively shuts it down. I mean, I guess so, like seriously, you know, like shut down, like even rolling over in bed, even making a decision to maybe, you know, lean over, maybe to get maybe a drink of water. I mean, it gets to the point like it's going to be like an extremely serious, you know, issue with just like rolling over, maybe just sitting up in bed, and possibly, you know, the heart backfiring and exploding because of the blood vessels are so full of like white blood cells and all these other factors that are going on. I mean, serious stuff, okay. But in any case, so like that the Safari browser presented the functionality thing like in anatomy, because, you know, like in networking, okay, it's like the hub, it presents the IP address going through like hubs, okay, but it switches and routes internally and then sends it to its way to get from point A to B to the fastest way to its destination. And switch and route it internally in a hub, yet in software it's called a node, okay, in performance monitoring. And in performance monitoring, okay, it's like it doesn't require an IP address or domain name, but everything it monitors is exactly everything about it, okay. The monitoring itself isn't really, it's almost like the sanctuary issue, like that's really going on with like the religious idea of like region zero, or constitutional laws, the black book, or state statutes annotated, or the black back on jurisprudence representing the idea of how, you know, television programming, auditing legal media is only the idea in my mind, not that it has to be, but it seemed to be, it's not that really it's by my choice, but it seemed to be the idea of like auditing legal media based upon K television, that, you know, it's like dependent upon some idea of like a Dietrich system being used as the last standard de facto in between litigation and res habeas corpus. And it seemed to be, I mean, like Wyatt Earp about the black and white transition from analog to digital, and all that information, you know, and going through the pastel colors and all that pastel, you know, Alphanumeric being 73, Houston, Harris, Egypt, and like an Israeli thing in Union. It has that connectivity in that way. But the thing with this is that what I'm really getting at, okay, is that once again it seemed to be that like I noticed that a lot of actors and motion pictures and bands with different titles and albums, it's kind of like seeing it and recognizing the grandfathered corporate law. It's almost like realizing, you know, like the script of life and like Fortune 500 and a whole bunch of producers like worldwide, you know, involving, you know, what seemed to be the FBI protecting regions of like motion picture, okay. And it seemed to be like the huge big picture and seeing that in like certain ways. And it seemed to be like really even Matrix, it seemed to be, it presents the idea of like the immune system blocking or producing overabundant amount like Safari browser. And it's like it's like in allergies are so specific with chemistry and anatomy. I mean, it's almost like the identifying factors of specific characteristics of each individual person, and it's kind of like it's like that in Matrix, and it's like an extremely specific thing about it, okay. And it's like it's in that movie in a practical application of like Matrix, okay. And that Safari browser, and it's kind of like the kernel, okay? It's kind of like the kennel, the kernel, and Lincoln, okay? A partition involving a kernel in programming and language, okay, is really the kernel, okay? But a kernel in programming and language architecture, platform, embedding, encryption, it has its degree placement of definement as the degree definition and its use. But in pronunciation in linguistic alphanumerics, I mean, it really is about the pronunciation, okay. But the thing with this is that the kernel, okay, it's kind of like even I think it's Canoe Reeves. In any case, okay, I might have to think about it. But anyway, it's kind of like the second I hear the name Ken or Kenneth, okay, it's almost automatically like the idea of partition or some idea of the penthouse pet, okay, or the thought of the idea of maybe the idea of like any neighborhood, really, truthfully, in any kind of way, that's not a commercial venue of living quarter. And the whole idea of like, where's the human capital in your life, okay? And the method of banking is ultimately gets to like any neighborhood based upon television programming. But it seems to get to that about Matrix, and that guy says Demetrius. It's almost kind of funny to me because it's almost like, high rise when it's complete. I don't know if every high rise does it, or if it's just the idea of like the marmalade sky in Pearland. But I know it seemed to be that Pearland is one of the locations of a map on 1992 identifying like red rectangles identified as restricted area, the RA, the R18 and the A1 being like 19, Kobe ID 19. Although restricted area, okay, it's like that all over the United States map in 1992, okay. And the thing about the U2 thing about the sclerum being spelled with two U's, okay, on the backside of the US $1 bill, but and all that information it seemed to be identifying 1992, including William Jefferson Clinton and Al Gore and the presidential inaugural ball with Chevy Chase hosting it seemed to be the thing. Ultimately, the word host, even the baptism of like June 14th, 1992, and it's kind of like the SG of the Holy Spirit, the S of Spirit and the G of host. The Holy Ghost is a host, and the SG of like Stargate Surgeon General, and like a baptism in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Based upon my experience, some idea of like the invitations tour was not my idea of maybe the Mormons actually making their way and just like presenting themselves. So like I already knew, I've always known really that the Mormon Church is like the American religion, okay. It's not that I had a question that there would be any distinguishable factors as a carbon footprint going to a King James Version Bible like church, okay, or the idea of like potential up for grabs in the air, or some like wishful thinking and some heat-seeking method of a field office, okay, involving like some amber waves of grain for Purple Mountain's majesties identifying the carbon footprint over a heat seeker in a field office and a color code. And the biblical scripture that Jesus said he knew before the foundation of the earth is like the field office and the heat-seeking color, that marmalade sky, yet Orange County in Los Angeles, yet it's kind of like the amber waves of grain, kind of like the burnt orange of like University of Texas Longhorns, okay. And even the iron ore, okay, it's not really gravel, but it has that color. Yeah, it's like the pastel of those colors of like the heat seeking and the field office that way. And it seemed to be, like the biblical scripture, Jesus said he knew for the foundations of the earth. And normally those heat seekers are shown like on world news predominantly what looks to be like the field office, okay, of like actual real military time, okay. The thing is that there seemed to be like all that like here in Pearland, okay. And hopefully, it seemed to be that computer programming involving the kernel, it's just, the idea of a proper English numerical composition between, what a partition is or is not. Not that it's identifying any type of segregation based upon television programming, or the idea of like the thought of being used as intellectual property over, an endorsement, or, distinguishing whether or not if the combining factor of like identifying citizenship and birthrights, whether it's a known or not known fact of a vice president network, is really the issue between like center point entities. Seems to be like really what's going on right now, of like center point entity, having center point energy having the idea of like a intellectual property is like mechanics lanes of trading energy in the North American Free Trade Act as North Atlantic Peace Treaties Organization of a Stargate program. Really, I've been through, okay? It's not that really I thought that at all until like 25 to 30 years later about about certain information. In any case, okay, so like I mean, it's like really intense in a lot of locations. Similar to the olive colored uniform that seemed to be in my mind, it represents the idea of Mount Olives, all the way from like Korea, is like, as far as my memory can pick up, it seemed to be the olive colored uniform, you know, in the Orient, predominantly in my mind. I'm thinking it includes China and Korea, North and South Korea, of the color all the way to the Soviet Union. I'm not real clear about how many locations in Europe, or if it's like simply isolated and segregated only because of region 1 and 2 being 12, or the truth, or the idea of like region 1 like letting, you know, Europe, region 2 on North American continent have fair use of like what seemed to be the Agent 007 thing about Mexico being region 0 and like Korea being region 0. And it seemed to be the 007 thing about, you know, like the Statue of Liberty and the Eurodollar that way in New York, about, you know, what really seemed to be, you know, the New York Federal Reserve Bank. And all that information that seemed to be in the secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, and ultimately even De Beers diamonds and you know, Keystone Pipeline, representing the idea of like a television programming in Twin Peaks, and the television series, the V television series of that one particular actress of Twin Peaks. Yet she does she's a spokesperson for a commercial of Infinity. And the guy right before her is like asking the question, is she born with it, okay? But it seemed to be really the V television series of Alaska and the Alaskan Pipeline all the way to Houston, and the Midnight Blue of the Keystone, and the De Beers diamonds in the book Secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, identifying, you know, certain factors of like Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, and it seemed to be the PHI. All those are like 23 English alphabetical letters in the acronyms of Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, but it seemed to be the PHI identifying the Midnight Blue, the first number of the prefix of the White House, as, you know, the 3, you know, lettered acronym in Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, okay? But it seemed to be those factors involving electronic power, and chemistry, and like robotic automation, and that one word attenuation, similarly identifying the first number of the prefix of the White House, similarly the real thing about, you know, the experience going through the circuit of a Stargate program, of like 1995, identifying, you know, the certain factors about the Midnight Blue. You know, even, you know, anyone who's like listen to rock bands like Foreigner, the Foreigner 4 thing, seemingly the real thing about, you know, the band itself and the title, you know, the compact disc anyway. But, you know, it's kind of like, you know, whether or not, if it seemed to be, you know, like I mentioned, that Matrix seemed to be presenting, you know, all that combine of what seemed to be a combine of like what's going on in the whole entire area, as available information, what availability means geographically in economics, okay? Or realizing that is, you know, really what's going on, and it seemed to be all the grandfather corporate law of retroactive presidential administration, really about the marmalade sky, like right now in Pearland, Texas, okay? And it seemed to be that television V series and a copacetic thing, and the word of like in Twin Peaks actually identifying factor as copacetic is like Keystone Pipeline, and the idea of like, you know, this the Keystone Light and the Coors Light as a copacetic. Although, you know, like Data Foundry seemed to be the thing about co-location, and, you know, the reality of the book, I mean, Secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, I mean, really has a lot of information, okay? Like, really based upon the baptism, I mean, I was like, you know, looking for information in a way, and what I was looking for in that book was automatically, you know, when I was like looking at the US $1 bill, you know, after a specific point of experiencing, you know, really something, you know, something of the alphanumerics that ultimately led to the idea of like mental telepathy minus God and Holy Spirit, okay? It got to that point, you know, beyond, you know, the thought of like subliminal message minus, you know, God or whatever the case may be, and Holy Spirit, and, you know, Jesus Christ, and all that stuff about Secret Service. But in any case, so like it kind of like led to that book, Secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, and I was really like focusing on the thought of Esco and a hard God and the name Robert, okay? And the information was there, but I mean, I didn't look at the sources in the back. I mean, it's the only thing I didn't do. I mean, what I was looking for, I mean, is a bunch of men's names. I mean, I wasn't looking for, like, the sources of information, but I mean, there's like hundreds of men's names named Robert in it. What would be like a concordance in, like, the King James Version Bible is like the sources of the information in that one particular book, okay? But I didn't even, like, read it the first time. And it's like all that information was, like, there. And I was looking really for escrow and a heart God and the name Robert in the content of the book. And I read the book several times, really 2 times, really concentrated and kind of skimmed through it the third time. And didn't realize that all that information that I was reading that had no significance to me at all was like developed into like everything involving like television programming and like importing and exporting and like what that is as a vice president network, as some idea of like a carbon footprint, absentee voting, mechanical lineage trading energy at the North American Free Trade North Atlantic Peace Treaties Organization, the Stargate program, and auditing legal media seemed to be like the real big deal between like Social Security Administration's acronym SSA and Health and Human Services as HHS, ultimately the idea of like 4, or FBI minus CI being 4, and the 44, the DD on the driver's license or Texas ID. It's referred to as auditing legal media, okay? Auditing whatever the case may be. The thing with this is that it seemed to be really involving, likewise, in addition, the idea of like Aetna and EA Sports. It's almost like the symmetrical, asymmetrical of the AE and Aetna and the EA of EA Sports, and it's like flipping a map about the information of the Biggers Diamonds in the book Secrets of Simple How Photos Overruns the Country, and yet the symbolic representation on the backside of the US $1 bill, yet practical application and meaning, but doesn't look the same. But if you don't know the difference and it sounds the same, it's really the issue. I mean, between like EA Sports and Aetna, but it's like the symbol on the backside of the US $1 bill, not limited to, the minimum. It seemed to be automatically, the 3 simple methods of addition being like 58, okay? But now it seemed to be the Mercedes-Benz thing of like my memory, my very first memory as like a newborn child is like specifically vision, not a concept of any language, I mean at all. And the 3 lights above, okay? I mean, now it seemed to be the Mercedes-Benz thing somewhere in my mind between like the Pentagon and Octagon. And, immediately, I think the first time my eyes opened up was like a gas mask of anesthesia. I mean, the very first time I opened my eyes, okay? And it seemed to be really having that significance now. I mean, like I'm 61 years of age, okay? And really because of like a spiritual experience of a baptism at the Mormon Church, okay, June 14th, 1992. And, led to like the Alphanumeric of, finding that mental telepathy, mind is God, and all that stuff about, Holy Spirit, Secret Service. It seemed to be that really, it seemed to be that it seemed to be the idea that before anything or any reference as an invitation stir had turned into the idea of an intellectual duration of my last band being used worldwide, going to a Stargate program, okay? I mean, like, I hadn't been told like no one thing about it, okay? Wasn't asked, wasn't anything like, hey, read the script, or or figure it out, with like a maybe a cartoon with a piece of bubble gum, And it seemed that ultimately, the automated system that presents the automation with ops for like the White House, okay? It's like I think it's like the invitation, the tour of like the automated system for the White House, and then it's like greetings from the president. And it's like really what that's doing is identifying a vice president network as intellectual property, having fair use as a carbon footprint, absentee voting, mechanics liens of trade and energy, North American Free Trade Act is really what that automated system is really saying when it's saying, are you calling about a tour? Are you calling about, a greeting from the President of the United States? I mean, beyond like the ship channel of K television. And then it's like channel 13. Are you having difficulty receiving our signal? Yet it's in my mind like Joel Osteen. Well, do you receive it? It seemed to be the thing about being on like supplemental security income as a direct deposit beyond the thought of like an endorsement of like a paper check. Okay? And having the direct deposit, but it seemed to be an ongoing issue between a direct deposit and it's almost like vice president networks and financial institutions are like combating the situation is like having fair use as a claim, an FDIC claim, of like, where's human capital in your direct deposit with like, supplemental security income over a vice president network over decades of like, not that I've been told like anything, okay? But going through it and like realizing a 25 to 30 year period passed that I didn't even consider the Stargate program or really even think that memory had been an issue. Hopefully, I mean, the military bird in the mind's eye, okay? Involving like we international State of the Union address and a bunch of entertainment that's really not funny, okay? But in any case, so like like I'm a drummer, okay? But the thing with it is that it seemed to be the whole idea of a television network that's not even involved in that way. It's like VSAT communications, beyond the idea of obstruction, beyond the neighborhood, any neighborhood, a monetary domestic aggregate seemed to be the only real reality about the clearance of what seemed to be, the idea of boycott and embargo as like buoyance of like a baptism, yet a fireside chat of the Hindenburg, identifying a color code of like, the marmalade sky, yet, it's kind of like Australia's Sky News. It's like it's in my mind about, the stratosphere and the marmalade sky now seem to be the Kobe ID 19 of 1972 that wasn't even identified as Kobe ID 19, but the Alphanumeric 1972, and so I'm saying make America great again, seemed to be, everything about the marmalade sky. All I know is that I woke up at sunset on a Sunday afternoon or, evening at sunset and not really realizing, that Sunset Boulevard in Friendswood, Texas is 20 years later after the marmalade sky of that one particular weekend, and the 4 months seemingly of May, June, July, and August is identifying 4 presidents that seemingly has been to Pearland. Okay? And it seemed to be each month is identifying each president for what it like means for them of like 1972 of a marmalade sky in that one particular weekend. In my personal experience involving linguistic alphanumerics, I mean, it seemed to be that really Japanese being 71 in Pearland is ultimately the idea of like Sony, and the only thing about Japan and Japanese being 71 in Pearland is the idea of a U.S. patent as region 1 of Sony, all the way to New York, at Japan and Japanese as the Orient. Not necessarily the question, but it seemed to be the only thing about Sony identifying Japan as like an Oriental like type of issue, but not necessarily the idea of like Korea being region 0 or Mexico being region 0 or the Eurodollar having fair use on the North American continent as some idea of like 12, or a new accomplishment transfiguration, and region 1 and 2 is 12, and the truth and the miracle of God and all that stuff about a quarterback, ultimately the quarterback being the idea of like a bicentennial drummer in a 200-year celebration, and the plenipotentiary, which seemed to be, the word between Wyatt Earp and John Wayne about auditing legal media, of like the grit and the writ, the W and the G. This seemed to be the only real thing about, auditing legal media applied to the Boolean chart and principles of digital audio about the digital signal processing speed of waveform predominantly, yet it seemed to be the word attenuation is practical application in quantum as far as chemistry goes, and practical application as far as like electronic power of America goes. Yet in robotic automation, it seemed to be that one word, it seemed to be combining all that as like quantum, as an easement, like Pearland, Texas, being Alphanumeric 140 and attenuation. Yet, it seemed to be, really the reality of like the absolute salute of like attenuation, with the UA taken out of the word attenuation and just be the attention and the UA thing, and the AU being like 22 and the FDIC, the idea of the FDIC or, Radio Corporation of America being RCA, and the 22 thing about, just the UA and the word attenuation being 140 in Pearland, Texas. And it seemed to be, all that absolute salute about, the idea of, what it means in, relation. So like in any case, so like it seemed to have all that stuff, but it ultimately seemed to be really ultimately in my mind now that really a blue ribbon cutting of a grand opening seemed to be the whole idea of a make and model. This seemed to be really the information really dating back to the first time I opened my eyes. Seemingly now seemed to be, even more so the Air Force of just that gas mask being anesthesia the very first time I opened my eyes, okay? But it seemed to be the reality of like the blue ribbon cutting. It's almost like the Vlasic idea of the monochrome, the history of a television screen as monochrome, and it seemed to be all that information. The humor, not that the Cuban crisis is the surface to air missile. It's just that the Q-band seemed to be the only thing about Kuwait, and the KU bands of VSAT communications, and the pronunciation of the W is really the double V, and the only two V's of VSAT communication involving the two KU bands pronounced W, and the K and the W being the kilowatt, yet it seemed to be the Kuwait and the KU bands of a military function of VSAT communication that's identifying factor like what's going on right now as sanctuary, as some idea of the Persian Gulf representing some idea of like the Muslim issue. But it seemed to be, really Oracle and Cybele in middleware, identifying, factors of Arabic as middleware of Cybele. That's VSAT communications that's really like over the idea of not requiring an IP address or domain name. And I think that's really the only thing about monetary and domestic aggregates involving neighborhoods. In my mind, the commercial venue of living quarter is, really, the living quarter, not a question of depreciation or deed restrictions, uses the lifespan de facto between litigation, which is ultimately corporate law, anyway, okay? And about annuity, many people's thought of litigation as corporate terms isn't normally associated or identified in news involving de facto. Is really the truth, and really knowing what de facto is as a combine, somewhere between like appreciation and depreciation, or settlement, or annuity, is really the issue. What de facto is with like litigation. It seemed to be the lifespan. It seemed to be like a transition going on now between Centerpoint Energy. Not that anyone's ever said anything about it, although grandfather corporate law, retroactive presidential administration, really seemed to be, based upon my experience, really what's going on. There's some idea of Centerpoint Energy ultimately even being like a transponder of a halo latitude in orbit, identifying, some idea of like, some idea of like a latitude, like a location like right here is like a CIA angel, since I like choose my words, okay? Seemingly that's 71 in Pearland, okay? Not that there seemed to be some idea of like some boycott and embargoes, like a method of like a holding as banking, or where's the human capital in your life and your whole entire life as a method of banking, or gee whiz, like where's your carbon footprint, absentee voting, and mechanics lane is like trading energy as an intellectual easement of the North American Free Trade Act. Me going through the Stargate program at the time, wasn't a Stargate program. Going beyond the circuit, and realizing that a 25 or 30 year period, it's really only because of a screensaver, really, that I knew for the first time that memory had been a phenomenally huge issue involving like the Europe's most wealthiest museum, okay? And then, all the other factors that seem to be including like YouTube and world news and national news and ultimately even local news. It's kind of like, realizing a lot of those places that were like being shown, it seemed like after I'd like mentioned certain factors, after I put myself on YouTube with my drums, okay, at Wade ASV Pretty PRDD, Wade ASV Pretty PRIDDY, YouTube.com with me on my drums, okay, 35 piece like Prohibition VSX like Strata Red double bass, drum set, okay, and I'm in the process of like, trying to overcome some idea of, whether or not I've pledged allegiance to furniture polish has been the only idea of Indus affecting, some mood altering experiences, like, the music industry, okay, or some idea of like a electrophysiology that's presenting some idea of, why a lot of bands have their own like idea of like the unplugged version. And really, I didn't know really what that was really about, really, but I kind of maybe suspected about, but it kind of like removed all doubt in my mind, realizing that certain locations were like actual locations of like bands that have their actual video on-site locations during the Stargate program, and I didn't really remember that immediately. I mean, it's like really intense in very many places, okay? And that's when I really, for the first time, really, I knew because of a screensaver of Europe's most wealthiest museum in the black and white thing, ultimately the color code of the space shuttle and the Holy Signal with 2 L's, being 137 in Clear Lake, Texas, even before Houston annexed, okay, Clear Lake, Texas. And, you know, Clear Lake being known as, like, command and control for, like, space shuttle, including, you know, Cape Canaveral and, like, Florida. Seemingly the thing about Atlantis, probably more so, although, you know, all the other stuff about, you know, re-entering the atmosphere and, you know, Challenger and the Columbia, you know, disaster and all that other information. But, you know, I'm not really trying to be really about the disaster at all. In any case, okay, so, like, when I realized that, like, 25 to 30 year period had passed and my memory was coming back and more videos were coming in, it's kind of like everyone, like, on the entire planet waited, maybe possibly anticipated, you know, that it would, you know, more likely be, you know, the 35. And probably the only reason why I can think of, really, that Highway 35 in Pearland seems to be the one and only geographic attachment is memory minus de facto being 35, or ultimately, you know, the human capital, like Austin, being a state capital of, you know, in my mind, you know, Austin Powers Blue Bonnet Imperial Eagle. And I can't believe it's better about, you know, the ratio, ultimately, you know, going beyond the thought of HTTP : // as the ratio, // okay, and all that alphanumeric and proper English numerical composition and symbolic and analytical and linguistic alphanumerics. In that way, it seemed to be the only thing really about a 9-degree right angle in pi r squared, E equal mc squared, and exponential quotients of powers and multiplication. More so a pronunciation in linguistic alphanumerics on analytical and symbolic. But, you know, in the degree level of its actual use as a degree, you know, it's like, you know, where it's really at, and by definition as the degree. But in the linguistic alphanumerics, I mean, I'm sure that probably everyone will probably agree, a major portion of it is so much about pronunciation and proper English numerical composition and studying language in a whole different perception, including the alphanumerics and symbolic and analytical and linguistics itself. I mean, I haven't found any major university anywhere on the entire planet that teaches anything about, like, alphanumerics. I've seen certain degrees of, like, linguistics, but it's really not. It's seemingly the thing that really seemed to be the issue of, like, television programming and circuit and VSAT communication, and the idea of obstruction in that way, or defining the meaning between a vice president network as a carbon footprint, absentee voting, or a mechanics lane as, like, you know, trading energy as an intellectual easement of a driveway, or even the thought of a current resident. The thing with this is that really, I mean, it's just not really taught, although maybe so, but I mean, as far as, like, a degree on any major, I mean, linguistics just really, and, like, the way I'm talking about it now, the way it obviously really, in my mind, really is, okay? Yeah, so, I mean, like anywhere, I hadn't seen alphanumerics, like, on any major university, really. I've seen linguistics, but they're not the same, depending on what university is focusing on what the core curriculum really is or is not at a geographic location. But in any case, like, it's already going on, like, 43 minutes and, like, 18 seconds right now. And I was wanting to, like, get back on the thought of, like, the matrix, and it seemed to be the combine, really based upon my experience, really, it seemed to be the overabundant amount of white blood cells produced as like, exposure, and it seemed to be the Sarbanes-Oxley financial instruments of SOX compliance, identifying the red and white blood cell. It seemed to be, you know, the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, you know, Bloodsport. Ultimately, even, you know, the Barrel of Fun at Astroworld and the needle. And it seemed to be almost like whether or not it was just the halo thing of the Barrel of Fun or Solid State Combine as, like, the needle at Astroworld before it, like, turned to Six Flags and moved to, like, San Antonio. But all that information, you know, is kind of like a huge centrifuge, okay? But it seemed to be the Sarbanes-Oxley of financial instruments, identifying, you know, like We International, or even, you know, Capital Christian Music Group, and, like, State of the Union Address, and, you know, like, a whole bunch of white and gold locations involving, like, the Kremlin, and it seemed to be music videos of, like, the White House and the Kremlin, of a whole bunch of white and gold locations of, like, phenomenally, like, real serious architecture. And the white and gold with, like, the blue seemed to be, like, up in a mountain somewhere. I'm not even sure if it's even on this planet, I mean, for real, but for, like, phenomenal, you know. I don't know what the deal is about, really, about the why it's so hard about the memory, or why it really, was the way that really seemed to be the issue of memory, okay? But I mean, it's like the white and gold and the blue of locations that seem to be like some of Michael Jackson's music videos that seem to be like up in the clouds, okay? Way up in the mountains somewhere, okay? And there's like certain locations I'm even wondering, I mean, like, am I even on this planet? And thinking that really is actually placed on a rocket and taken to a real international, space station. I mean, there were like locations like that would give the impression of like motion picture, of like, huge scale. That would give the impression of like, international space station. But I'm actually thinking that really was actually placed on a rocket and actually taken to an international space station orbiting, this planet. I mean, for real, okay? And all these things are like going on. It seemed to be what started out like when I realized that memory had been the issue, an automatic 6 to 9 month, then an entire year, and then it got to the part of like the memory and realizing that it was really including a military bureau determinant of the mind's eye. I mean, the real thing about it, okay? And then it was like the 2-year period, only based upon available information, based upon only what I heard and like knew of as available information. Seemed to be, the 2-year, possibly a max only of the weekend of the Marmalade Sky, representing some distinguishable difference between the different design E of calculus, yet the different design E of like quantum being the EE that has the structure, but it seemed to be the real thing about the Marmalade Sky of that one weekend. And it's like it identifies, the baptism at the same time. It seemed to be the monetary domestic of a Stargate Surgeon General, of a baptism, and retroactively, I mean, exactly that. Like right now, okay? All the way back to 1972, really my birth year, seemingly of like, what really seemed to be the deal between, like, the idea of like the Vlasic deal being, television programming, or an eccentric triangle. It's like, the dolphin issue on the Atlantic side. Even a Bryan Adams music video, Thought I Died and Gone to Heaven. And the thing about the dolphin, okay, it's not like I'm really trying to think about a Bermuda Triangle, yet I'm really thinking, although it is an eccentric triangle, the thing of it is that the eccentric triangles in economics identifies, a nation's major, production as like importing and exporting. As an eccentric triangle, a plane horizon is what it's really referred to. In economics, it identifies like a country, a nation's like major importing and exporting factors that way of eccentric triangles, okay? But it's on the Atlantic side and it presents all that information during the history of the television screen as monochrome, and Wyatt Earp being the ERP exclusionary rule provision, a plenipotentiary of executive powers, sovereign immunities, and governmental amnesties is really in my mind about, the oldest governmental computer mainframe called the Whopper, yet the black and white monochrome, going through the pastel colors of Technicolor, and, getting to the living color thing, like, going, into the John Wayne thing of like the true grit, the written grit, and the W and the G that seem to be the only two. And it's not the only way of computing, but it seemed to be the only two letters, the W and the G. One being the G going to the B in venue of human civil rights at the B in venue in Geneva, Switzerland, seemed to be really the thing about going beyond the Bluebird bus of like the Airbus H-160, beyond the ship channel of maritime law. Is really my experience. Me remembering anything about it, I mean, it's extremely not easy at all. Although there was like one blue one doing a 360, okay? And I'm not even sure if it's the same place, the same day, same location, just a different view. I mean, really, a lot was really going on. I was really in a real serious condition at the time, okay? And been on gurneys like wheelchairs, and those helicopters were there, okay? And I hardly remember, anything about it, okay? And I'm not sure if it was like several times. That's like some idea as an option, actually in progress, all that going on. As some idea, well, it's like an option, okay? It's not that I chose any of that to be that way, but it seemed to be based upon my memory, it being like a blue, and it's like the colors of AT&T, and New Jersey is like the international network operations of like the blue and a white thing, about ultimately even the idea of AT&T taking over Southwestern Bell, seemingly the thing about reach out and touch someone, and let your fingers do the walking of like a V-twin figure 8 drum twirl of a double bass drummer. The thing about Southwestern Belle and Reach Out Sunset One is really the thing about really my baptism. And it seemed to be, it becoming real more and more and more real about, that book cover of Psychic Warrior, America's Foremost Psychic Spy, and the cover of the top secret CIA Stargate program, and the author's last name is like Moorhouse, okay, but the guy's like underwater, I mean like a baptism, I mean Stargate program, okay. And, all this information going on, I mean, I've spent like a lot of time, decades, looking at some of this information, and just thinking about, what I've already read and like studied analytically and symbolically and alphanumerically and linguistically, okay? And all that information seemed to be ultimately, identifying, the Marmalade Sky as it seemed to be the 4 months of May, June, July, and August of the 4 presidents. Seemingly, that was actually like a sculpted like iron placement of the presidents that like been to Pearland, okay, on Highway 288. Seemingly it's the thing of the Marmalade Sky, and it seemed to be each president of 1972, the Marmalade Sky, not really identified how it's being identified, but really obviously in my mind it's really that of what May, June, and July is of that one weekend of the Marmalade Sky designating the 4 presidents, not limited to, okay. And it seemed to be the thing about Vladimir Putin at the same time, and the VP, the Vice President, Paul Walker, in the book Six and Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, and Trump being 88 and Vladimir being 88, it seemed to be the history of television screen is the Velastic is like the monochrome, yet it's like the Atlantic side of like My Friend Flicka, I mean, like the dolphin thing, okay? And the thing about it is that location is not really the Cuban crisis, okay? But the only thing about the Q band seemed to be the KU band. Okay, what is normally identified as the eccentric triangle, referred to as the Bermuda Triangle. Okay, I'm not trying to be about that. It's just an eccentric triangle in my mind, identifying plane horizons of that magnitude of what's normally identified involved with that triangle, okay? It's just an eccentric triangle on the Atlantic side, and the history of television screen is monochrome, yet Wyatt Earp and all that information, it seemed to be that the Lassie Onassis thing is originating as the V, yet it's almost like the Infinity commercial of the Zoom at a 9-degree and the magnitude of like what seemed to be Trump saying "Make America Great Again," and it seemed to be that movie with like Wesley Snipes and like Elizabeth Hurley, a passenger 57, and to "Make America Great Again" seemed to be the colors of like Great Britain, red, white, and blue. It seemed to be her and Hurley about the goggles and Google and goggle. Even the Bryan Adams music video and Elton John, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and the kaleidoscope eyes. For real, it's kind of like it's unreal available information, okay? And it seemed to be the grandfather of corporate law, a retroactive presidential administration. Just really the way I look at things based upon really my experience, okay? And it's kind of like that music video, Thought I Died and Gone to Heaven, the black and blue thing about the black and blue, yet a Chris Tomlin, music video, Holy Forever. Really the real deal. And it's not limited to that one thing or that one music video. And I'm actually trying to place it in my memory. Okay, like I'm in a dark room, okay, and it's really the real deal about military bill determined, the mind's eye, okay. My eyelids are being opened. It's like the real thing, okay, of the mind's eye, okay. And I didn't remember that, like, really for like a 25 to 30 year period. And I'm already like practicing it, singing it, and liking everything about it. It's not really that it's going to change. It's just that really, it's really been that long before I really remembered really anything about it, okay? And I'm a musician really anyway. But the thing of it is that it's almost like that Sammy Hagar song, Returning Home. And the American Express Bluebird card, the green and blue, the color to see, and a particular person, laser corrective eye surgery, of a coupon with the blue eyes, yet like the identical identity of like a Austin Powers movie of the identical identity with green eyes in a wheelbarrow seemed to be really the thing about the flower power. Even a Robert Plant song, I have my flower, I have my power, I have a woman who knows, it's alright, she said it's alright, it's all inside of my heart, yeah. Okay, well great, okay. But it seemed to me ultimately, even like Robert Plant and Led Zeppelin identifying like the Hindenburg um, of the Marmalade Sky, and the Fireside Chat identifying the color of the Marmalade Sky of the Hindenburg. Although a Fireside Chat, yet it seemed to be ultimately even the idea of carbon footprints, absentee voting, mechanically the traded energy of the North American Free Trade Act, identifying the idea of a student loan combined with a Pell Grant as a Fireside Chat, yet a pool of collections of a defaulted student loan. It's almost like baptismal terminology of a boycott and embargo as a method of holding, yet a defaulted student loan and a pool of collections. Yet, the thing about Chevy Chase, okay, it's like on a map in Washington, D.C., all about, Department of Education, okay? And yet it's like, it's all like combined as a Fireside Chat of the Hindenburg, yet a color code of the Marmalade Sky, yet a default student loan combined with a Pell Grant of Presidential, Executive, Legislative as a Pell Grant. And it's like foster grant and adoption is relation, like student loan combined with a Pell Grant, okay? It's like Al-Anon representing the idea of a ship channel as obstruction, as like presenting itself as like family law as a presence of a soap opera on television in everyone's home. It's auditing legal media. Another reason why I really don't like watch television. I watch YouTube, and predominantly really more so about music. And right now I'm like really thinking about really getting. I'm really working on, talking my way straight into a Hill HX-50 helicopter, a blue one anyway, with a 3-point, wheels on it, okay, and a hangar with like 2 motorized like landing inside and out thing, and and really, it's kind of like that's all I was really about was like, the future is like what's this whole entire area in my mind, including like a high school, a major university, and Airmark Arena, maximum seating capacity at 26,000. I just decided, that, after, experiencing some, like, fine greatness and magnitude of alphanumerics and, Campbell's alphabet soup and, for real, okay? And the thing about, alphabet cereal and, really, I started really thinking that really I was going to just get serious about, acting like an executive about it. And just, be everything it could be to an entire geographical area, because I just feel like being that way and writing that way about it, okay? So like I'm still thinking about that Airmark Arena maximum seating capacity of 26,000 indoor entertainment venue like on Highway 288, okay? And even like the Transept Horizon yacht manufacturing distribution in Freeport. Yet at the same time Visions Tower high rise tower of power 75 floor, all about, the heaven, like on this planet, okay? Maybe 325 floors at the same. Visions Tower high rise, the elite presidential executive, idea of like, living in a high rise facility, okay? But anyway, so like all that's like going on, it's not like even limited to, like a real serious like hospital, okay? And some real brains about, production and entertainment. My thing about We International is kind of like, I see Los Angeles in my mind as like, the real like location of, seemingly of what seemed to be the Marmalade Sky and the Hindenburg of a Fireside Chat. Yet it's almost like the iron ore in pronunciation that's not gravel, but something that seemed to be of in my parents' driveway of the weekend anyway, of the Marmalade Sky. Yet it has that color. It's really not considered, I don't think it's considered gravel, although used like that, and it has that color. Or seemed to be the biblical scripture Jesus said he knew before the foundations of the earth. Yet it's like that heat seeker of a field office of the FBI, of that heat seeker as a field office, and a biblical scripture Jesus said he knew for the foundations of the earth. And that iron ore, it's kind of like someone making an idiot out of someone. The iron ore, or what? It's kind of like, and now it seems to be like someone I used to eat lunch with like all the time, about the or what thing, And it's kind of like the iron ore. It's kind of like, well, what do you mean? Is the iron ore? Is it like categorized and named that over maybe the thought of maybe of a commercial venue or a high rise? The iron ore, or what? The field office? It's not that it was ever led to believe. It's like, it's written. Is that what I mean? This is executive administration, like in my life, okay? The iron ore. What do you mean? What are you talking about? Like a field office and like what's going on like now? The iron ore what? A wooden buffalo nickel, identifying like McDonald's hot cafe coffee cup over Roe v. Wade, and like I'm 61 years of age. It's like no longer alphanumeric excuse and proper English numerical composition is fake news. Just because like I'm 61 now, born in 1964, and have some miraculous perception of finding a wooden buffalo nickel about coffee. Ultimately now, even the temperature of the water of a Flag Day. Yes, Flag Day. Wow. Flag Day, June 14th, 1992, Saturday, SAT, VSAT, the highest possible score of a baptism at the Mormon Church in Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints in like Friendswood, Texas, okay? You know, the Galveston County 213 thing about the Z701 in Pearland, okay? So like anyway, okay, so like, yay, alright, so like now it seems to be like great, okay? And now it's kind of like, you know, it's got to the point that really, so like now it's like the temperature of the water is like identifying factors that seem to be like of coffee now, based upon, you know, the thought like how do you like your coffee, you know, black or like with cream and sugar, really seem to be the issue now of the temperature of the water. I mean, it's the one and only baptism that like the water was warm, okay? And I mentioned previously I'm uploading it now. I don't know what the issue is with like getting it uploaded, but it's going on like the second day trying to get it uploaded. But I'm referring to like the Point Break movie with like Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves and Gary Busey saying, you know, die for a brick blindfolded. And it seemed to be the thing really almost like Deep Star 6, yet at the same time the brick is almost like the iron ore, the brick or the wooden home and the wooden buffalo nickel about the coffee and the temperature of the baptism in the water. I mean, really, I mean, it's not a question in my mind that's reaching one location of, I mean, like the baptism, it seemed to be, I mean, for real, like, you know, William Jefferson Clinton, Al Gore, and Chevy Chase hosting the 1992 presidential inaugural ball. It seemed to be, I mean, the year of like the baptism, seemingly potentially a requirement between the Persian Gulf and Latin America based upon the information in the book Secrets of Simple How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country. And some idea of transition of like the Eurodollar having very use of center point energy like on the North American continent in Pearland, Texas, okay? It's kind of like where's the human capital in all your life, okay? Like when a method of building of like center point energy has been some idea of like trading energies like mechanics land as the North American Free Trade Act and like where's everyone's citizenship and birthrights all of a sudden over carbon footprint or something purple as California and Trump or the idea of Mormon being 88, okay? Okay, my name is Wade Sir Pretty. I mean, like I've mentioned it and been talking about it for quite some time. Do I need to like, you know, have my name as Wade Aryan Skyans of Atlas still Alphanumeric 213 telepathic brainwaves beyond the idea of the ship channel of maritime law as liquidal equity? And maybe get beyond the thought of maybe a vice president network? Maybe even SAN software itself? A VSAT communications is not requiring an IP address or domain name, yet it seemed to be everything like above it all, really not feeling effective. Maybe its point of origin as maybe an international banking system. Seeing the thing about the Persian Gulf being Muslim, although the Kuwait thing, seemingly of all the information being on supplemental security income, and my point about, you know, the matrix identifying the supplemental security income in practical application, and it seemed to be presenting the complications of the Safari browser, yet amyloidosis in Sarbanes-Oxley, financial instruments of SOX compliance, similar of like Jean-Claude Van Damme's like Bloodsport involving phlebotomy, in my idea of like, you know, Sarbanes-Oxley, financial instruments of SOX compliance between Chicago White Sox and the Boston Red Sox, two of the major cities of the 12 Federal Reserve Banks, okay? And all that stuff, I mean, it seemed to be ultimately, you know, originating this idea of like the barrel of fun in Astroworld as a huge centrifuge, and what was called the needle at the time. And it's almost like the halo thing about the barrel of fun, yet the centrifuge, yet the needle, you know, and it's kind of like almost like the solid state is a needle. That's kind of like, you know, it was referred to as like what looks like a cylindrical band around like, you know, a tower ascending into the sky, okay? It was referred to as a needle, yet some of that information is like almost like an Insensible Turkey with a Bryan Adams music video, which is also Insensible is a symbol for like a drummer, okay? In any case, so like all that information ultimately leads to like White House terminology involving Thanksgiving and the gobble gobble, even the idea in my mind of like the Velastic issues is some idea like the Lassie Onassis issue, the history of television screen, and it's not really the Cuban crisis or the surface to air. It's just that it seemed to be really the idea that it's on the Atlantic side of an eccentric triangle. Okay, although the surface to air in my mind is really something, you know, wishful thinking, that seemed to be really ultimately the idea of like a blue ribbon cutting, grand opening. Similarly, the thing about, you know, the idea that, hey, that cucumber, that pickle was once a cucumber. I mean, for real, okay? And the thing with this is that, you know, the idea that the Vlasic idea of Lassie, or the V series of the actress of Twin Peaks, I'm going to have to, you know, remember her name, okay? But she's like a Twin Peaks of the movie in Alaska, okay? But ultimately, she had her own like television series called the V series, and it seemed to be the V of Alaska and the Arctic Circle. Really, ultimately, the connectivity between like the Soviet Union and the United States, and the thing about Alaska that way. And similarly, the thing about the Vlasic and television programming is the monochrome, similarly of Wyatt Earp and John Wayne, and the transition through pastel colors of Technicolor. And it seemed to be, you know, the Wyatt Earp thing about, you know, a plenipotentiary of Wyatt Earp, and Earp being the exclusionary rule provision of like executive power, sovereign immunities, and governmental amnesties of the oldest governmental computer mainframe called the Whopper. Okay, but in proper English numerical composition, once again, you know, it gets to, you know, the Whopper being the pronunciation of Whoopa, which is a blue and purple bird of Israel. It is only one bird, it is blue and purple, okay? Although purple is 88 and blue is like 40, it's like 128, but in my mind, that blue and purple bird of Israel, it's just like Zion in my mind, being about 1,000 years apiece, and a combine of 1,000 years apiece, or Grover Cleveland on a US $1,000 bill combined being 1128, and that blue and purple bird of Israel. Similarly, the thing about the separation between church and state and the Mason-Dixon line in my mind, going beyond the thought of like obstruction, not being presented issues that might be the only issue of like internet protocol. It's like oh man, IP address and domain name. You know, really what that is obstruction as a degree, you know, of like the idea of like clearance, okay? So like, I mean, you know, it's already going on an hour and 8 minutes and like 3 seconds, okay? But anyway, you know, I wanted to include that and try and get this up. I don't know what the deal is about the processing speed. I was referring to some of the information involving Matrix, and that one actor, he's a black guy, saying Demetrius. It's almost like funny to me in proper English numerical composition about, you know, when a high-rise is completed. And like I said, I'm not sure if every high-rise does it, or if it's really the issue thoroughly made and manufactured as a technique of persuasive thinking, okay? The tree on top of a high-rise when it's completed normally in construction is really the only thing I've ever known, but I'm not sure if it's always that way. I'm not sure if it's always a tree when a high-rise is, you know, finished and completed. But in my mind, it's almost like that movie Matrix. It's like it presents all the issues of amyloidosis, the Jean-Claude Van Damme blood sport, Sarbanes-Oxley financial instruments and SOX compliance, and the idea of like Safari browser. Yet Social Security Administration, yet the electronic benefits transfer, and the idea of beyond a method of banking is VSAT communications and 2 KU bands representing, you know, the pronunciation of the W, really the double V of the 2 KU bands, and the only thing about the double V really being a W and the K being the kilowatt, and like the center point energy smart meter, similarly of a transponder at this location right here, in my mind, ultimately of a transponder as a halo latitude. Normally the idea, like in rotation, in orbit, is a halo latitude. In my mind, ultimately, any latitude, seemingly a 90 degree is a point of origin of military time, and right now seem to be the transition of center point energy to Texas New Mexico power. And the only thing about TXU energy is kind of like, like TXU energy like has known the whole entire time, okay? It's not like anyone's told me like not one thing about anything I'm talking about. It's just everyone says, well, hey, it's available information. In any case, so like I'm kind of like thinking about all that because it seemed to be really thinking about all that information combined, and some idea like complications that would be maybe the thought of maybe the matrix is specific. That would be maybe the idea of like allergies specific involving chemistry that sometimes involves chemistry of anatomy of a specific it's probably more specific than I know of involving allergists. I haven't really heard of phlebotomy using the specific methods that allergists use for specifics about allergens, and specifics of allergists being identified maybe as a practical application of catalyst in phlebotomy, okay? I haven't heard it referred to as any practical application between like an allergist identifying chemistry as a specific chemistry of each individual person. I mean, it's extremely specific. I mean, that way of like, allergists. But I haven't heard it used as like phlebotomy or the blood sport that seem to be, involving, amyloidosis or, even White House terminology is Thanksgiving. Of the gobble gobble thing about really the immunoglobulin in my mind. Ultimately a whole bunch of stuff. It seemed to be like even including the idea of VSAT communications above it all, not affected by its own point of origin as like international banking systems, like over the whole entire situation, not affected by deed restrictions or the idea of like deed restriction being used as lifespan de facto involving IP addresses, internet protocol, or intellectual property, but seemingly the only idea of access that way that would be some idea of wow, a star is born, and eternal truth will like, well, great, okay, well, like, yay, all right, yeah, so like, in any case, so like, I'm ready for it, okay, yeah, sure I am. So like, anyway, so like, I was kind of like thinking about that because, as far as like audio production goes, that's really my motivation, okay, but unlike any other motivation, this is one particular coupon of LASIK laser corrective eye surgery. I mean, has really been motivation. I mean, just as a current resident. I mean, it's really not hard for me to believe, but I mean, the way I think about it now is compared to from the very beginning, completely unlike any other. So like, anyway, so like, I want to include that, okay? Anyway, so like, I'm kind of like thinking about a whole bunch of stuff, okay, including this lighting. And the kaleidoscope I was saying about that being the HD colors, kaleidoscope splendor of color, which really, at the time on YouTube it was showing like 3D animation unreal, not even repeating itself. I mean, I couldn't see it like I watched one for like several of them for like 3 hours. I mean, non-stop, trying to actually see if I could see anything that would look like one loop or repeating itself. I mean, like one time. Or any deviation that would represent some idea of sequencing. I couldn't like see like not one. I was like in like complete awe, like going, man, that is like beyond phenomenal. And it was actually available at the time to actually purchase, and I was going to get that, but when I got ready to actually purchase it, it was like made available as like on YouTube. But when I actually went to do it, it's kind of like where to go, And hopefully it led to like what you're seeing like on inside this tent and on me. Predominantly, the HD colors, kaleidoscope splendor of color fractal animation, and it seemed to be, the kaleidoscope. It seemed to be the kaleidoscope eyes of Elton John being the EJ15, the prefix of the White House, and a 15-year duration of the one particular person. Let me think about where's it at here real quick. But anyway, yeah, I'll do it again later. But a 15-year period of the prefix of the White House of the 3 times LASIK laser corrective eye surgery in my mailbox, okay, the 3 specific, a 15-year period, okay, it's not limited to those times, although the thing about in my mind, that Rush song, The Camera Eye, and payments may team with intense energy, because I mean it was a 15-year period, and it was only the second time of a laser that I knew for the first time 43 years earlier. It was only because the second time of a laser that I knew that a pitching injury had involved a laser, and I didn't even like know it or realize it, okay? That served as a point of origin that led to the first number, the prefix of the White House is really what it is, as the number 4 and the prefix of the White House being 1983 based upon my birth year, okay? And the thing about the Social Security Administration's phone number, 1-800-772-1213, ultimately, you know, in the column of Alphanumeric and chronological from A to Z, L is 12 and like M is like 13, and straight down, you know, in the chronological order, ultimately, you know, L is like 64 and M is like 65, and the combine of 1964 and 65 being 83 and 84. And it seemed to be, I mean, the book, Secrets of Simple How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, right there about winners and losers. But it seemed to be the only thing about that chapter, winners and losers, and the Social Security Administration's number being 1-800-772-1213, ultimately 1964 and 1965 being 83 and 84. The whole idea, the whole perception of that chapter completely changes when the US dollar, with like an S with one line at a 90 degree, looks like 1 cycle per second of frequency being measured in oscillation with that center line at a 90 degree. Yet at the same time, at another 90 degree, it becoming side by side. It doesn't look the same, but it's kind of like supposed to mean, you know, a degree level or reputable standard of considered participation, like McDonald's Golden Arches, okay? Although it's the electronic schematic symbol of the fish representing Christianity, yet, you know, the humor, the dyslexic humor between gastroenterology and like gynecology, and my waited my whole life to be polite. And I mean, you know, in any case, okay, it hopefully gets to the fish swimming up the ladder and the fertility about the misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi and the affirmative fallopian tube on a continental level, okay? And all that fertility and the idea of that chapter, winners and losers, in the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, I mean, it totally changes the entire perception with that practical application of the 90 degree of the US dollar at a 90, and the half above and below with the center line of oscillation at another 90 again, becoming side by side like the electronic schematic symbol of the fish, yet, you know, beyond, you know, gastroenterology and the thing about, you know, gynecology and the fertility and the river climbing the ladder and all that stuff of high rise and the Statue of Liberty. I mean, it just completely changes that, the whole perception of that chapter, winners and losers, based upon Social Security Administration's phone number, and really based upon my birthday, 1964, and the last 2 numbers, 12 and 13, 1-800-772-12 and 13, hopefully 1964 and 65 being 83 and 84, and Trump referring to the idea of like fake news being 84, or states plural, 65 plural with an S, or 19 being 84. The thing with this is that the Roe v. Wade factor seems to be like, oh, that's going on. It's already going, God, it's already going on like an hour and like 18 minutes and like 41 seconds. Wow, I really need to take a break. I mean, for real. And hopefully this will process and upload to YouTube like immediately, and maybe I'll get it on like Facebook.com as well. But I mean, you know, all this is going on in my mind because, like, when I was reading that book, Secrets of the Simple How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, I mean, I wasn't looking for any of that information. I was completely gone based upon the experience of, like, a spiritual experience of that one baptism not many days since. I was kind of like, you know, looking for answers, and I wouldn't find them, and ultimately led to Alphanumeric, okay? An extremely slow learning process of, like, at random, you know, not even really knowing what I was looking for at the beginning, but ultimately it originated as, like, even a heart god in escrow with the name Robert, okay? Which is really part of the experience, okay? And it seemed to be, you know, whether or not, you know, if some other factors involved, like, actually hearing that, okay? You know, that talk about body talk and body language, okay, is really the factor of that baptism, of that word really coming from like my heart, okay. The name Robert, okay. So like anyway, okay, after that perception is almost like in my mind, a professional witnessing of a telepathic, the immediate area, okay. Yeah, I mean, it seemed the whole entire issue is like it was all written in, like I'm the one that's like just decided that it's kind of like no one has said a thing yet. But it's kind of like, Galveston County and like the American religion, the Mormon churches having fair use of the King James Version Bible. It's kind of like, the carbon footprint and absentee voting of like a worldwide like Stargate program that I've been through, okay? I mean, maybe it's because like no one else on the entire planet wanted to, really go kind of like, like what I've been through, okay? I mean, not that I've been told what an invitation tour only means. It's maybe the thought of maybe the automated system of the White House, like you're calling about a tour. Are you calling about a greeting to the President of the United States? And maybe we're talking about an airport in Chicago, or returning home of Sandy Behavior Song, or maybe just like another deal about the podium representing some idea of like, a combine of zoom lenses of like Black Moon Rising, of a phenomenally huge perception of the military term of the mind's eye, like in Chicago, and like someone like at the podium of a Bette Midler song, even the movie involving, Passenger 57, okay, with Wesley Snipes talking that talk outside at the airport like Bet on Black, okay. And the only thing in my mind is that particular issue seemed to be like the Bette Midler song in my mind of like the actual reality of like going through like a circuit, okay, of military discernment of the mind's eye. Ultimately, the idea of like an appraisal of a resurrection, okay, and a bunch of information, okay. Similarly, the idea, I'd ask the question, I mean, is it like that Chicago's chosen as the central time zone? I mean, it's not like the idea of like where every military burial determined like comes back home. Is it like Chicago? Or is it just like the time zone that a person is born in is like taken to its like designated headquarter of the time zone? I'm actually trying to find out, but Chicago is like the headquarters of the time zone. Obviously, the time zone that's actually calibrated by atomic energy that powers a laser. This is the actual calibration for the time zone, okay? And Chicago, okay, being the central time zone, okay, which is actually the thing about Boeing, as well as other factors, okay, in my mind, it's kind of almost like that movie Passenger 57, and Wesley Snipes making that statement. I think I only said it twice. And one is outside at an airport, which really seems to be the issue of what I'm really referring to, of a Bette Midler song, God is Watching from a Distance. And that jet in the Dream Theater, music video, Sacrifice Sons of the World Trade Center, which is like the George Bush is in it, okay, and it's like the cargo jet, the Army Green. It's the same design. It looks almost virtually identical, but a different color. Yet the Soviet Union presidential jet has the 24-wheel landing and the 6 landing wheels on the nose. It's almost like the Quiznos and the PG-13 rating in my mind of the pituitary gland, which seemed to be really of the Marmalade Sky of 1972. And it's kind of like, I'm kind of like, thinking, hey, I mean, like, is there like a main artery from like my brain straight to my erection, okay? So like, where's it at, okay? So like now it's kind of like, all this information is like a combine of like all this information of like what air quality is really meant in Pearland, Texas, including waking up at sunset like on Sunday, okay, which 20 years later after the fact of the Marmalade Sky and all that, like, hey, what's your 20? And 20 years later, the White House, namely the Alphanumeric of 20 being 107 is actual location right now where I'm at right now. It also been 20 years later of the baptism, June 14, 1992. It's like, the Alphanumeric is like 213, Galveston County. Chevrolet Silverado is a Z71 thing about telepathic brainwaves. And the Marmalade Sky and some idea of the Hindenburg is a fireside chat. It's like Orange County in Los Angeles as the air code 213. And all that information I'm talking about the wall and the design of like state and federal local authorities of the wall of Lockheed Martin, seemingly, of like, the idea of like, Lockheed Martin's arrows, like the 2 arrows for lines of 3 intersecting axes that ultimately gets to the idea of the 5 eccentric triangles. In my mind, it seemed to be identifying the idea of like, the Transco Tower turning to Williams Tower. And, the Allied Bank at Milam turning into Wells Fargo, then the Williams Tower, and it being the Twin Peaks of television programming. Yet Lockheed Martin, it presents the two arrows, somewhere in my mind of Art Howell, being like the goalie of the Houston Aeros is the name. I'm not sure if they even look the same, but Art Howell and the Houston Astros, the first baseman, and the glove. I'm not sure if it's the Michael Jackson thing about the one glove, probably so, between Art Howell, how great thou art, how how great art. Yeah, so it seemed to be, that glove between a hockey goalie and the name Art Howell of hockey, and some idea of a Swiss Klondike bar in Geneva, Switzerland. And, Art Howell, the Houston Astros, the first baseman, and the glove being the same thing about it. And, years later, Art Howell, the first baseman, became the manager of the Houston Astros, the color of the Marmalade Sky, okay? And the grayscale really seemed to be, the deal about the 56-10 and Roe v. Wade, with the grayscale of 5 and then 6 and then like 10 on the Houston Astros uniform of the grayscale of the orange colors of the Marmalade Sky, okay? And the paper made thing about 56-10 being 94 or annotated adoption abortion of Roe v. Wade. And it seemed to be really, ultimately, if it's the only idea of my name being an idea of the front lines of the beachfront, or some idea of the ship channel as local equity and maritime law, my thing about, the Marmalade Sky and Aryan Skies of Aten, it's kind of like, it's kind of like I'm feeling the need, and I've been talking about it. Maybe I really need to just, really just start doing it, and I am really doing it now. I was referring to the Wade Aryan USA thing and Aryan Skies of Aten, because, is it really going to continue until, like, that happens, and, like, Texas, New Mexico power, regaining the idea of, like, TXU Energy, regaining control of some idea of the U.S. dollar as citizenship and birthrights beyond the idea of being used as vice president network of immigration, custom enforcement, likewise, and in addition, importing and exporting of, like, gross national product, representing some idea of only monetary domestic as neighborhoods of internet protocol, only identifying some deed restriction as television programming, the lifespan. De facto, it's like deed restrictions between litigation and writs of habeas corpus, auditing legal media. So, like, all this is going on in my mind, okay, because I'm thinking about, like a blimp, and like Australian Sky News is a Goodyear blimp. Not really the idea, although it seemed to be the thing about the Hindenburg and the Marmalade Sky of a fireside chat of a defaulted student loan as collections in a pool of baptismal terminology, combining a Pell Grant with student loan is like foster granting and adoption as a relation, and architecture, platform, embedding encryption, as ventures and mergers as corporate law presented as family law, as a television in every home of every neighborhood that's not in a commercial venue of living quarter. And that's really what I really feel like, like having and getting, including everything about audio production, as not being affected by, everything that really have already been, through, okay? Something like beyond, like anything like really, so like, all that great stuff about, some greatness and magnitude, exponential quotients of power multiplication, or some like greatness of like, some idea of like, yeah, the whole idea of like maybe the entitlement, like, and including some idea of like escrow between like a Reese's statute and the IRA, or some idea representing some idea maybe, and including the lottery, yeah. But in any case, so like all that thought of like a star being born, okay, a telepathic star is baptized, okay. I'm not real thrilled about the thought of thinking that really all that was going to happen just because my name is Wade, or some idea of a carbon footprint, absentee voting, and McCansling as Trading Energy in North American Free Trade Act has a designated driver, and it's just like, really, I just happen to get one, or is that just the only idea of a region 0 or 0 on a Texas driver's license number, not really knowing what computer programming means as citizen birthrights as carbon footprint, absentee voting. Doesn't seem to really be anything that I've ever heard from the Department of Public Safety, identifying maybe a 0 at the beginning from left to right, identifying a region 0 as like a carbon footprint, absentee voting, or maybe the idea of like auditing legal media as a deed restriction, or binary numbers representing computer language and programming of architecture, platform, embedding encryption, and all that information. It's already going on, an hour, 29 minutes and like 32 seconds, okay. I gotta take a break, okay, and get this uploaded. Hopefully it'll start processing and really maybe I can get like an hour recorded processing like in the blink of an eye and light speed, okay, instead of like it's going, you know, really, I mean, it shouldn't take more than, you know, several seconds to upload an entire hour, not 2 or 3 days, okay. So like anyway, I'm gonna try and get that done because it's already that like it's already like late already, okay. So like there it is, okay.